Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is July 24th, 2012. And I feel obligated to tell you all, since you were talking about the weather, that it was 83 degrees in Ormond Beach today and a beautiful sunny day. I've been here in Ormond Beach for about 3 months now. I moved from Jacksonville, Florida 3 months ago. I have a sponsor. My sponsor has a sponsor. And as I said, I've been sober for almost 12 years, coming up in July. I'm pleased and surprised to be able to share my story with you tonight. Oh, and there was one other thing I wanted to tell you. I live really close to the railroad tracks, and the windows are open. The 8 o'clock train has already gone by, and I'm hoping we don't hear any others. But if I stop for some reason, it's waiting for the train to go by. I had a fairly uneventful childhood. There's no family history of alcoholism in my family. So I used to believe that was really the only way that you ended up being an alcoholic. And I was always confused by how I and my brother ended up alcoholics. But we did have some significant trauma in our childhood. I had a stepfather who hurt me as a child. And I think that may have been part of the reason that I became an alcoholic, just to forget the anxiety and the stress of my childhood abuse. I had my first drink when I was 16 years old. By most of our standards, that's a long time to wait. But I went to a party with friends and drank until I was drunk, and subsequently drank until I was drunk every time I drank, all through my early years. Friends used to tell me that I did horrible things when I was drinking, and I didn't believe them because I didn't understand about blackouts, and that you could be fully conscious and do things that you don't remember the next day. I didn't drink alcoholically until after my divorce at age 45. But at that time, I started drinking from the time I got home from work in the evenings until I was either drunk or passed out most every evening. I did get up and go to work every day. And I worked for a group of doctors, and one of them was my physician. And he would do my blood work every time he did a checkup for me. And he would say, "I don't understand why your liver functions are so high." And I would open my big blue eyes and say, "Well, I just can't imagine why they're so high. I don't understand anything about this." And he let me go with that for years. And I lied to the doctors for years about what was going on, and did a pretty good job of looking like a perfectly respectable member of society. But as I said, I went home every night and drank myself into oblivion, or went out and drank, which was even worse, because in my drinking, I was totally without morals. I didn't care if you were married or if you had a girlfriend or anything else. I was ready to party with you no matter what. And it's a wonder in the little town in Maryland that I lived in that I didn't get shot by somebody, because, as I said, or meet one of the doctors I worked for when I was out. But I didn't. And I was very lucky. And in a lot of ways, I drove drunk. I drove drunk with my children, and I was just, God was looking out after me to make sure that I didn't get in an accident, and I never had a DUI or anything. Any of those things might have stopped me, but I didn't have any serious consequences of my drinking, except for the health concerns. So when I was 54 and living in Maryland, it was suggested to me by 2 therapists and 1 friend that I might need to go to an AA meeting. I didn't go primarily because I didn't understand what AA meetings were like. And those people who suggested it really didn't explain it to me until one therapist did. And she said, I said, well, my concern is that they'll try to convert me to Christianity and become a holy roller. And I'm just not, that's not what I'm interested in. And she explained to me that that wasn't what AA was like, and that you could choose your own higher power, and that nobody was going to try and shove God down my throat or anything. And that wasn't I didn't need to be Christian to be a member of AA and to benefit from the program. So when I was 54, I had my first grandchild, and I decided that I wanted to be around for my grandchildren, that I wanted them to know who I was, and I did not want them to know me as the funny grandmother who was, falling down all the time. So I woke up one Tuesday morning and I decided that I was going to get sober. And I believe that that was a spiritual experience for me, that because I stopped drinking that day and I have not had a craving or obsession for alcohol since then. And I don't know what it was about that particular Tuesday that just made me decide that I was done. But I went in and talked to the doctor that I worked for and explained that I had this problem and that I was going to an AA meeting and that I was going to stop drinking. And I wondered if I needed to worry about any adverse effects from stopping drinking immediately. And he didn't seem too concerned. So I didn't go in detox or anything. I just stopped. I didn't have any problems. I just was blessed in that way that's all I can think of. But as I said, I did it for my health and for wanting to know my grandchildren and wanting them to know me. And, but I also didn't really want to stop drinking. There was a whole part of me that was like, I just want to get where I can go to lunch with my girlfriends and have 2 glasses of wine and have that be all that I want, and go home and that's all the drinking for the day, which I couldn't have done before that at all. Once I started, I didn't stop until until I passed out or blacked out. So before I moved from Jacksonville, well, wait a minute. Oh, so I went to my first meeting and I met some ladies there who quickly took away the idea that I would be able to stop drinking and just drink like a lady, drink a couple of drinks and have it over with. They were like, no, you have to stop drinking altogether. And they were not subtle about it at all. They scared me to death. But on the other hand, it made sense to me that, because if I couldn't stop drinking after 2 drinks, there was no way that I was going to have some miracle in my life that let me drink 2 drinks and not have any more. And I was upset by this because my first thought was, well, what about if the children get married or graduate from college and I can't have a glass of champagne? And in the whole scheme of things, that was a very small concern. But for me, it was really important. And I've, been to plenty of weddings since then. And I know that I can say, no, thanks, I won't have any champagne, but I can celebrate pretty well without having to have a drink. In fact, most people would be glad that I didn't have a drink and celebrate at their event. I moved to Jacksonville about 1 year sober and got involved with the program right away because I didn't know anybody in Jacksonville, and the fellowship was my community. So I got involved with the program right away and became very active in Jacksonville. I was going to 4 or 5 meetings a week, and I did a lot of service work. I was on what they call the phone army, which is after the intergroup office closes at 5 o'clock, they have a series of people who do 2-hour shifts on the telephone. So I was on the phone army for about 4 or 5 years, answering the phones on Thursday evenings. I was the GSR for my home group, which was the Bay Meadows group there in Jacksonville. And I was the treatment coordinator for the district. And I also took a meeting to Lakeview there, which is a women's recovery house that they have there in Jacksonville. It has quite a turnover. They don't keep people there for more than about a month. So it was like a new meeting every time I went there. I met new people and they were exposed. We did a lot of step 1, 2, and 3 meetings at the Lakeview house. Let me see. I wanted to tell you something about Lakeview and it just went right out of my head. Well, anyway, I was doing all those things at one time. That was that was the thing that kind of was difficult. It was a little too much. I tend to take the saying that you can't say no in AA pretty seriously. And so when people would ask me to do things, I did them pretty steadily. But it kept me sober, and I had a lot of experiences that were just wonderful, meeting people and learning the business ways of AA, which were really interesting. And I go now to a traditions meeting, a traditions study on Friday nights on Zoom, which is very interesting because once you get past learning about the steps and then you start digging into the traditions and how they affect the group and how you can use them in your life, it's a really important consideration. And that's when you're really digging into AA, when you get into those kinds of things. As a GSR, I went to a lot of the area assemblies, met a whole bunch of new people. Jacksonville has had the state assembly in Jacksonville several times during the last 10 years. So I was involved in that. And those are the ways that I kept myself sober. To me, I'm a very social person. I'm not an introvert at all. And I need to have other people that I can talk to and people that I can bounce ideas off of. And in the Jacksonville area, there are just a lot of very intelligent, very thoughtful people who can talk to you on that level about the program. One of the things that I say that kept me sober for a long time is a group that I go to also on Zoom. They have a live meeting and a Zoom meeting. It's where they go through and study the Drop the Rock book. And we do that a paragraph at a time. And then we discuss. Some days we get through like 2 sentences and that's all we get to talk about. And some days we do whole paragraphs and whole chapters and we discuss them. The Drop the Rock book, in case you don't know, is not an approved literature, but it's used in a lot of groups. It goes through step 6 and 7 and how much more there is to them than is in the big book. That you'll recall that when you read about step 6 and 7 in the big book, it takes about 3 or 4 sentences where it says, once you finish step 5, go home, say a prayer, ask God to remove your defects, and then your defects will be removed. Well, it doesn't really work like that. It takes a lot of effort and a lot more work. And the Drop the Rock meeting would let you know how the different ways that you can keep your program alive by working constantly on your character defects and beginning to recognize them when they become apparent to you, so that you can ask your higher power to remove those from you and keep you in a fit state. So that group has been close to my heart and has kept me sober, as I said, for a lot of these years that I've been going there. As I went through my program, I found that I had a lot of resentments that I fed. I was angry. Angry was my default. I was angry about things that had happened in my childhood. I was angry about imagined slights from people at work or a boss that didn't like me. And I used to feed those fires in my heart like a little gnome sitting there by the fire, just feeding it, putting more fuel in the fire, more fuel in the fire. And I wasn't very thoughtful about that. I was, looking back, I think, how could I have believed that that was good for me to be feeding that fire all the time, to be having all that anger and anxiety in my heart all the time? I did a lot of work on forgiveness. A lot of the time I didn't want to forgive. I wanted to still feed that fire. And it took me a long, long time to get to the point where I could work on those problems and work on forgiveness. I read a lot of books and I went to a lot of therapists, and I started to look at the saying is hurt people hurt people. And that helps me a lot to be able to look at people and say, well, what is it in that person that makes them want to hurt other people? Or what could have caused this transgression that they did against me? And so I learned to forgive, as much of a struggle as that was. I, particularly my stepfather, I learned that he was one of 8 children in Ireland. And I believe that he was probably abused the same way he abused me. And that doesn't make me want to forget about what happened to me, and it doesn't excuse the way he behaved, but it let me be able to forgive. And then I start looking at other people who have these imagined transgressions against me, and I feel like if I can look at what they have in their life that perhaps could cause them to be reacting the way they are, it helps me a lot to forgive. So forgiveness is one of the big things that I work on often. And I want to say just a little bit about the Serenity prayer, because for me, it's been a life-saving prayer. And I say it, I've worn it out. When I first became sober and I was learning how to share in meetings and how to help other alcoholics and ways to give up resentments that I had, I wore it out. I just was constantly saying the Serenity prayer, and I recommend it to friends all the time when they talk to me about struggles that they're having in their life and the way people won't behave the way they want them to. And again, those transgressions, those resentments, the Serenity prayer for me is probably one of the most important tools that I use. And I urge all of you to use it, to think of it often, and to have it at hand. Oh, let's see. My higher power, I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because my higher power, I mentioned before, I'm not a Christian and I don't have a traditional higher power. And so I talk about that in meetings where I feel like it might help people who are struggling with finding a higher power and feel like they can't be in the program because they don't have a higher power or can't imagine ever finding one. I find that it's helpful to people to see somebody who's been sober for a long time but doesn't have a traditional higher power. And I say different prayers than the group says. During the Lord's Prayer, I keep silent and say my own little prayer because, as I said, I'm not a Christian, so that one just doesn't fit into my ideology. Used to really bug me that we used it, because I felt like it was, it cut some people out of the meeting and that it might turn them off the way I thought I was going to be turned off. I went in with a little more open mind than I would have if I hadn't had that talk with my therapist. But I think that perhaps we're not as welcoming as we can be to people with other points of view. But as I said, when I talk to people about my higher power, I tell them about how I say different prayers to myself, and that it doesn't bother anybody and it doesn't bother me. And that's the way to get around that. And so I just wanted to mention that, because in case anybody in the meeting has had that same experience of not having a traditional higher power and needing to maybe keep quiet, which you really don't have to, and also not feeling like they're doing it right because they don't have God in their life. When I hear people in the meeting talk about God, my brain now doesn't even notice it. I just automatically change it to the name of my higher power in my head, and I can accept anything that is said in a meeting about higher power, because I can fit it into my own conception of what a higher power can be. So I think that's all that I have to say tonight. I really appreciate you all having me, and I hope that you found something in my talk that you can take home.